I do want to thank you for coming tonight and taking the time out of, I know, busy schedules, busy weeks, to spend a little time sharing some of our concern, our deep and abiding concern for the safety of our children, our youth, and the vulnerable of our community, who especially we spend time with in ministry over the period. In the last 4 weeks, I have received a lot of emails requesting more information about what the Safe Environment Program is that we follow here in the parish community, so that we can be assured, that parishioners can be assured that there is a whole range of activity and a whole range of concern that marks our ministry here at St. Anne's for the safety of those all the way from the youngest, especially in preschool, all the way to the most senior, who we often spend time with in ministry, in nursing homes or as shut-ins or in hospitals or in other environments in which they are in the most vulnerable of situations. So I wanted to take the opportunity to address some of that information need that people have been expressing. Tonight, what we're doing is we're also, I believe, streaming this out live to anybody who is sitting at home who can't be with us. So I welcome those who are watching this in their homes. We're also going to be, if I'm not mistaken, putting this on a YouTube, so that in the next days ahead, you'll be able to locate this whole evening if you want to go back and look at it again. If you want to invite other people who are asking that question about what's being done to make sure that there is a safe environment at St. Anne's, you'll be able to tell them, please go on our website, which has a section, a special section on safe environment with a number of resources that we're putting on there now, resources for links for different articles that have been written, different resource materials that are out there in relationship to safe environment, but also the whole of the sexual abuse crisis, so that people can look on that and be able to find much more information to answer many of the questions, or at least to allow them to go to other places where they'll be able to get more information, even if all the questions can't be answered at once. So I do want to take the opportunity to thank you for your interest and your concern in coming tonight and in being concerned with the children, the youth, and the most vulnerable of our community, and to know how our time together can help them and make them feel safer and have a welcoming and a caring environment in which to participate in our life together and grow in their faith. We've assembled a wonderful group of people who are dedicated to this whole ministry of safe environment. From the Archdiocese of Atlanta, you'll be introduced to them as the night goes on. Sue Stubbs has come. She's from the Office of the Protection of Children and Youth. She leads that special ministry for the Archdiocese, and she's going to share with us a lot about the Archdiocesan program of safe environment, which is the foundation for what we do here at St. Anne's. We also have from our administrative staff and our faith formation staff those who are involved in the ministry, starting with our youngest children and working through, again, our older senior members who have a great need for our ministry and pastoral care. We also have a representative, I believe, from Live Safe. Yes. Alicia, and she'll be introduced. And she's going to talk about something about the resources that are available for those who, especially for those who have suffered the trauma of sexual abuse, those who are continuing to have strong emotional responses at this particular time and need some place, some resource to be able to go to in order to find some solace, some comfort, some understanding, and some help. And so I welcome you and thank you for being here this evening. We've also put together some resources so that when you leave tonight, they'll be out on the table out there, and there are going to be a variety of resources relating to what you'll be hearing this evening in the various different areas, so that you can take those home with you. So again, thanks very much for being here tonight, and I want us to begin with prayer. O loving God, we, your own beloved children, thank you for your care of our lives, present in so many ways and through so many people. We thank you for your presence in our midst this night. Fill our hearts with the spirit of courage as we seek to discover how to continually care for and keep safe the precious children of our families and our church community, and to protect all of your most loved and vulnerable brothers and sisters. Bless our learning and our conversation with your spirit of wisdom and understanding. Bring your peace and your hope to all who suffer the trauma of abuse in all its forms. Give them the gift of strength and help them to experience your loving companionship on their journey towards healing. And help us to more faithfully and carefully accompany them on the road to reconciliation. We ask all this through Jesus Christ, our Lord, the Lord of healing and hope, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one loving God forever and ever. Amen. I'd like to start by introducing to you Patricia. We're going to have the names are over. Pat Falatico? Falatico. I knew I was going to get that wrong because it was Italian. But Pat Falatico, who's going to moderate and facilitate our evening's conversations and learnings. So Pat, I invite you to come forward. She'll introduce herself and let you know how the evening's going to flow.
Thank you, Father Ray. Good evening, everyone. My name is Pat Falatico, and I have an interesting story to tell you about pronouncing that name, Father. When my daughter Anna to dismiss the students to their classroom, pronounced her name Falatico. Now, as Kelly knows, my daughter is quiet and shy, but she wasn't when she was 5. She stood up and said, "It's Falatico," and then proceeded to follow her PSR teacher. But let me thank you, Father, first of all, on behalf of all of us assembled here. You used the word courage in your prayer. And I think it's really important for us to remember how important it is to be courageous, to be able to be open, to have a very difficult conversation, whether it's personal in our own lives or more globally in our church life. It's hard to have emotional conversations. But Father wanted us to be armed with fact, and that's what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to listen to 3 sets of presentations. The first is all about what the requirements are for each parish to follow from the U.S. Council of Bishops, as well as what's coming from the Archdiocese of Atlanta. So Sue is going to lead us through that discussion first. When Sue is done, we're going to ask you if you've got any questions around the requirements so that we can be very focused to make sure that we get your questions answered. We will then move on to the next set of discussions, which are all about how is St. Anne's responding to the requirements that are being placed on all of the parishes. And you've got a lot of information that will be shared with you. Same thing, we'll follow up that section with a set of questions and answers. And then finally, we'll talk about the resources. And Elisa will take us through the resources that are available as she talks through what Live Safe is doing. So that's the flow for the evening. Should we have time at the end, we will open up to more broad questions, but that's how we figured we'll be following the process this evening. In your pews, there are little slips of paper. If you don't get your question answered, Stephanie will be collecting those strips of paper so that we can make sure over the next couple of weeks, months, we can collect the resources necessary to respond. So with that, before we get started, anyone have any general questions about how we're going to run through the evening? Okay, then please join me in welcoming Sue Stubbs. Father did a wonderful job introducing Sue and what she does.
Mine is the Victim Assistance Office, and my coworker, Perla Freed, does the Safe Environment Office. She, unfortunately, is out of the country right now, so I am taking her place tonight. We do work very closely together. When I first took this position, I did both Safe Environment and Victim Assistance, so I am well-versed in both sides of it. So the Office of Child and Youth Protection is here to help the parishes. That's what our job is at the Chancery. We were created to help the Archdiocese meet than what doesn't. So they haven't changed a lot about it, but they do look at it and adjust it as needed. So the charter covers a lot of areas. There's 17 articles, but in those articles it addresses safe environments, the healing and reconciliation, and it also talks about how dioceses are to respond to reporting, to actually make the reports and respond to cases that come forward. It addresses cooperating with the civil authorities when we make these reports. It talks about disciplining the offenders, and it provides a means of accountability for the future. And one way it does that is that we're audited every year. Every diocese is audited every year for their compliance with what the charter requires us to do. So the charter does define safe environment, and it does this in a general way because every diocese is different. They require that there be a training for children about being safe, how to be safe, and for adults. So Virtus is the one that we are using now. We had our own program, You Matter, for a few years and realized that it was quite difficult to keep it updated on our own. So Virtus, that's what. And a secular program. And we're using the one that, the Christian program. And we have sessions of Virtus in the schools and in the parishes every year now. The kids go through the program. And we have it for adults, and that means all employees, volunteers, clergy, religious clergy, and contractors. And it's renewed every 5 years. Most of you probably have already gone through a 3-hour Virtus training program. If not, when your You Matter runs out for for the 5th year that it was good, you'll take it. And after that, when you renew it, it's a 1-hour class. So it's not 3 hours every 5 years. Then each diocese, on top of the classes, have to have a code of conduct for clergy working with kids, and then we also have a sexual abuse policy for that as well. Then we have ministerial standards. There's quite a few different ones for working with youth, for working with vulnerable people, and anytime any of these people that I listed, any adults, have to go through and read these, understand them, and sign that they're going to follow them before they can work or minister in the Archdiocese. Now, recently, I didn't put this in here, but recently, one of the updates they made to the charter was that anyone who had any contact with children has to do this. And used to, it was a regular contact. So that has opened it up a little bit more. To more people are required to be cleared than before. Some parishes have just decided anybody who volunteers in any capacity, they do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years that's what everybody ends up going to, because it's just safer that way. So, okay. So Article 13 talks about the background checks. So everybody, again, the ones that I mentioned before, employees, contractors, clergy, religious, and all volunteers who have contact with minor children have to be background checked. We use a company called Sterling. It's a third-party background check company, and they screen back 7 to 10 years for criminal activity, and they also check the sex offender registry. And everybody has to be background checked every 5 years. Some dioceses do 8, others do 3, we do 5. So there's no defined requirement of how many years to do that in between. So the charter also defines victim assistance. It requires that we reach out to victims and survivors on a spiritual and emotional level, and that they make it clear that that's our first obligation, is healing and reconciliation with the people who have been hurt. And the outreach may include counseling, spiritual assistance, support groups, and any other social services that are agreed on by the victim and the diocese. I work very closely with the victims, and most of them will accept counseling, help with that, and some of them will come to the programs we have that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Some have specific needs, and anything they request, I pass that along. I'm kind of their voice, and I don't think we've ever refused anything someone needed that was within reason. And it's been my privilege to do this, and it's been very rewarding in a lot of ways and difficult in others. But I've been doing this for about 14 years, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. So the Victim Assistance Program specifically we have 2 retreats, one for women, one for men, called The Way. We have 2 for women every year and 1 for men. The only reason there's 2 for women is because when I do the men's retreats, there's usually like 5 that are there. So if I have it more than once a year, we'd only have 2, and that's not enough to have a retreat. So those are offered throughout the year. They're spread out. And then we also offer trauma recovery groups. And all of these programs, the bishop has open to anyone who's been abused in any way by anyone, not just church-related abuse. They've been very well received and very successful so far. So the charter, again, I said, also calls for reporting. And Article 4 in the charter states that diocesan personnel are to comply with applicable civil law that addresses reporting of allegations of sexual abuse of minors, not just sexual abuse either. You also any kind of abuse, but when the charter was written, it was focusing on sexual abuse, because our law in Georgia requires that we report any suspicion within 24 hours. Now, every state is different, so they had to write this kind of with that in mind. So whatever state you're in, the charter requires that you follow the law in that state. And then in every instance, we also advise the victims that it's their right to make a report as well, that it's not something we would ask them not to do, to keep it. We're not going to ask them to keep it a secret. Okay, so in Georgia, in 2012, they changed it some they broadened the definition of mandatory reporter. So now all volunteers are required to report as well. It's not just professionals like teachers and nurses and doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. And then the clergy outside of the confessional has to do the same thing. And it has to be done within 24 hours of the time that you become aware of it. When you have the suspicion, you have to report it within 24 hours. So DFACS has now kind of streamlined. You can call the county office, but they have a central number, which makes it a lot easier to report. So basically, I just tell people, tell them what you know. You don't have to have every single detail. You don't have to know exactly what happened. You just call them, tell them what you know. You know the person's name, you know kind of where they live, you know sort of what happened or what you've seen. And if you're not sure, if you're like, oh, I think this kid may have had some issues, report it. Because if that's suspicion right there, is you've noticed something that makes you wonder. And to me, when in doubt, report is what I tell people. And then our policy asks that you follow up that report with a letter to the agency that you reported it to. That just gives us and them written confirmation that we've done what we said we would. Okay, so my office, the Safe Environment Office has a ticketing system. The Victim Assistance Office, that wouldn't really work well for us, but if you email any issues you have to them through this system, it's kept track of, and it helps us too to keep track of what kind of questions are asked so that we know where the issues are and what to address. So that's very helpful. But you can also email, call us directly. We have Perla and myself. Terry does a lot with the Safe Environment. He helps Perla with that. And Gina helps both myself and Perla with both of our offices. She's our program assistant. And this is the main number to our office. And if Gina does not answer, it will tell you what extension to push to get us. Or you can just leave a message on that number. Some important contact information. Again, this is the number for DFACS, Department of Family and Children's Services. That's the DFACS is like the acronym name for it. And then we have a 24-hour child abuse reporting line that the Archdiocese started years ago. There's someone answers the phone 24/7. As soon as they finish the report, they send us an email. They call me. If it's after hours, they call me or Perla or Bishop Schlesinger. And usually they'll get me or Perla before they get him, but he's good with it too. So that way we can get in touch with anyone who needs help as fast as we can. So those numbers are really important to have around. And just a few resources that we have. These links are on our webpage. The Virtus, of course, is the program we use for the safe environment training. The Promise to Protect and Heal is the USCCB, Office of Child and Youth Protection. And then NetSmarts is just a really, really good program that teaches kids how to be safe on the internet. And then we've also got the DFACS number. I also have a sheet in the back that you can take with you that's got a lot of resources as well. And just remember that safe environment is really everyone's responsibility, and it starts with each one of us. If each of us does what we know we need to do, then these statistics that you see in the middle here hopefully will decline. So that's what I have for you this evening.
So much, Sue. And could you go back to, you might have a question or two before you do, if you could go back to the
Sure.
Archdiocese slide.
This one? Or
The
next
one back. Now, he said all of the resources will be in the back, but since it's a little small to read, if anyone wants the telephone number, it's 404-920-7550. Resources will be in the back. So, any questions for Sue? She took us through the whole set of requirements for the screening of individuals who come into contact with children and vulnerable adults. She took us through the healing and recovery supports that are available at the Archdiocese, and then she's taken us through the reporting requirements. Does anyone have any questions for Sue? Yes.
What age is considered a child?
Anybody under 18. Now, in our, also in our programs, we include people who have not graduated from high school, because when you're a senior, sometimes you turn 18 before you graduate, but we still include them as minors.
Those children who are over 18 and who are violated.
They would be considered adults, and we would still respond, but it would be in a different way, because what the law will not allow us to report that. Once you're an adult, you have to report it yourself. They will not take it from a third party. I know.
In terms of prevention or screening, is social media investigated?
Yes. That is a good question. I mean, I know that I'm trying to think if I don't think that Sterling does that. I believe.
I'm thinking in terms of both checking social media and having the right to monitor it.
Yes.
Well.
I know we do have a social media policy. And there's a lot of guidelines, especially for youth ministry. I know that we do require that if someone is in touch with the kids over social media, the parents have to either be aware of it or get copied on everything is sent to the child, if you're a volunteer or an employee. We do have the social media policy only covers, the people who are, it's like I'm not very versed on social media. I try to stay away from it if I can, so forgive me. Perla is much better at this than I am. She's very savvy with it all, but the social media policy was actually written by the communications office, and we were consulted with that because, through experience, we have had cases, not necessarily here, but when we go to our national conferences, people who have been in touch with people they should not be talking to late at night on social media. And that's one way that people can get into a situation that can be pretty shady. So we do monitor that. I think what you may be asking me is, do we go to the social media pages of people that are working for us and stuff and check and see what's on there? No, we don't do that. Now, if someone brings it to our attention, then we'll respond to it. But there's no possible way we could check all that. So we do tell them what's expected, and if it's not met, then we'll manage it.
Is there any psychological testing up front?
For clergy, yes. For seminarians, yes, there is, definitely. Okay.
And if you have any follow-up questions, write them down. We'll get you the answers back.
Yeah, definitely.
Sir?
There's definitely, yes.
Is there any of this available as public record? Like if I wanted to look up how many reports were in the Archdiocese last year, is that information that's available?
No. We don't have that anywhere at this point. I know that...
Okay.
Sounds like feedback. I know that Bishop Gregory is looking at that. So I don't know what the answer to that's going to be. And I'm not sure, first of all, you have to define what that means. Sometimes things are reported that turn out not to be true. Sometimes things are reported that there's no way to know if they're true. So it gets a little, it can get a little, we have to define what needs to be out there, what needs to be known. Does that make sense? I'm not saying that we don't want people to know. It's just that how do you decide which ones to talk about and which ones not to?
And Sue,
Because to me-
in all fairness, it sounds like it's something you personally can't address. So we're
No.
going to take a note
Yep.
of that and get some more
Yep.
information when it becomes available.
Okay.
Is that okay? Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Many of the problems that we've had has been with the lack of leadership in doing things right. It was a cover-up, caused a lot of the problems we have. It has gotten into the media. Is there any intention of getting in front of this? We've heard of this in political things where you need to get in front of your problem. You need to, air it out before it becomes this monster that has caused such hardship on the Catholic Church in America and probably elsewhere.
Again, I'm not sure how much I could say to that, but I do know that the bishops are working on it. And I know that people in America, we want things now. It's fast food and push a button, everything happens. Church doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And it's slow. It's methodical. It's paced. So I do know that there is a lot being done. And I believe, Father, you said you had some information out for what they've done so far.
You'll have a sheet, 4 pages with some information on questions that have come up. And that's one of the questions. I understand that, again, since we can't answer the bishops and whatever, but the point being, the meeting in November, they meet every November and every June. In the November meeting, the administrative committee of the USCCB, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, has put together a set agenda that the bishops will be working on, and I've got that in there in terms of the different things that they will be involved in. Again, the USCCB is the United Nations in the sense of they try to get the bishops to get on board. I think the Dallas Charter here to get everybody on board, but every bishop is involved in his own diocese.
Canon law.
Deal with it.
The way to-
But they do have plans to deal more with the accountability of bishops, specifically who have not brought forward transparency in their diocese. They have plans for continuing to monitor and make more effective the mandatory reporting that needs to be done in every diocese. And they are requesting an investigation of the current Herod case by Ross. And that's some of the things that they're going to be talking about and making hopefully decisions about in the November meeting. The Pope has decided, at least I think it's in February, that he's going to call something like an extraordinary synod, which means that all the bishops, heads of the bishops' conferences, and there are about almost 145 of them around the world, will come together, and their main topic area of both discussion and decisions will be the protection of children and young people. That's coming up in February. The Senate, as Sue was saying, the church doesn't deal right away. We do want things right away, but they're working on these things, and hopefully more information will be coming out as they have their discussions, make their decisions, and then make them known to us. That's all I can tell you.
Thank you, Father. Thank you.
Since you've implemented the like background checks and the code of conduct and those other things, have you seen a decrease?
But we have across the nation, actually. And I was talking to one of our priests this week, and he was telling his congregation that it's a lot of what we've done has decreased the opportunity for people to be abused. And that's huge. We've done a lot with that. His other concern is something that I think we're starting to address, is the way that things are structured, that power, the use of power is what we've got to address next in the structure of things. So it's the opportunity has really, like you were saying, I think since we've put in all of the stuff the charter calls for, has really, the numbers have gone down dramatically. So I hope that can spill over into other areas of society as well, not just the Catholic Church. I know a lot of other organizations, not just churches, have called us to ask what we're doing and how we're doing it, and they're implementing a lot of the same kind of things. So I think that's a definite positive from it all.
Thanks, Sue. We have another.
As well as, and I think you mentioned it, it's important to know that in seminary education these days, and at least since the charter began in 2002, it's mandated that everyone is psychologically tested rigorously, and then you go by the results of psychological testing for safety out. But looking at the possibilities that there might be red flags that have to be looked at, or even yellow flags that have to be looked at and dealt with before a person is allowed to come again and push it forward.
Great. Thank you. We have one more question.
My question is, we're a very mobile society, and I know teens from this church travel all over the country on mission trips, in fact, all over the world. If an incident occurs outside this archdiocese, and the youth comes back, does he or she report it to our archdiocese, or are they obligated to try to figure out which diocese or archdiocese may be relevant in the circumstance?
I would suggest they start with us, and we will help them work all that out. We definitely would address it, because it needs to be addressed within the program that they went with to the trip, and then also with the local authorities there. So we would help them do all that.
My second question relates to those youth that are more vulnerable than others, maybe vulnerable because of language, vulnerable because of disability, vulnerable because of a family environment that may not encourage a youth to be more forthcoming with something that may have happened. How do we ensure that those that may not have someone to speak on their behalf have someone to speak on their behalf?
Yeah, I don't know that the word ensure is applicable. We can, as we come in contact with them, we can hopefully build trust with them enough that they would share with us what's going on, and then we would report it. That's really all we can do. And they, again, they would be, while they're with us, subject to the same safety rules that all the other kids are too. 2 people there with them, 2 adults with them at all times. All those things we've put in place. But yes, I do see what you're saying, and it is difficult. And I do think that there may be, I know Maggie Rousseau, who is our disabilities coordinator, she has been talking about more training so people can maybe recognize the signs differently for kids with disabilities. And some cultures, they just don't talk about it. So, that's a very complex answer to a question that I'm not sure there really is a structured answer to at this point. But I do know that it is something that's needed.
Okay,
Yeah.
we have 2 more questions on this side of the church. If anyone still has questions, please write them down and we'll get the answers back to you.
Yeah, I've been at this parish 25 years. I've been a Catholic all my life, approaching over 70 years of age. But here's the thing. I'm a consultant in government bureaucracy and the rest, and we've really become a bureaucracy. We do not tell the outside world what's happening, and in this information age, there's a lot of stuff going on the internet that we cannot dispel. You're mentioning here that it's improved. What do we outside hear that tells us that it's improved? All we hear is the contrary to that.
Okay.
So I think we need to get ramped up. Now, we say the church consists of all the bodies within the church, but yet when it comes to decision making, we have to wait for the bishops to come every 6 months or whatever and make a decision.
Yeah.
And that's unacceptable. I think in this day and age, we need to be more responsive, or we're going to lose the congregation. And that, and you may have seen it even in the offerings in the church and the attendance of the church. And in this information age, we have to be different. And maybe it starts with the Archbishop to convince him that something needs to be done. But I think we need participation from people in this church.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a group that forms at each parish to make suggestions, because the archbishops don't have all the ideas.
No.
They need to be fed from within the body of the church.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the change starts to come.
And I went to the convocation in Florida last year, and there was a lot of talk about that. We had little groups, and a bishop was in each one, and that was a lot of the conversation was that we need to have an avenue to be able to share with them that information. And I'm sure the bishop would love to hear from any group that has ideas. In my experience of him, he's very open to that. And I think the other thing that I can say, my experience too, is, and it's frustrating for me because I feel like we have made a difference in the past 10 years. And the media, they just aren't interested in telling anybody. So we can only toot our own horn as far as we can get it, which is usually the Georgia Bulletin and our website. So we've done that. We've tried. The USCCB has a lot of statistics that there's a sheet out there. The back side of it shows everything we've done in the past years and the statistics of how many people have been trained, how many background checks we've done, how many people we've helped, all kinds of stuff. But disseminating it is difficult because the secular media just isn't interested in telling the good news. They just want to talk about the stuff that's still a problem, which it is. I'm not saying that everything's peaches and cream. But.
Well, to your point and to yours, Sue, coming together like this, sharing information, puts real information in our minds that we can then advocate on behalf. I once heard someone relate a conversation similar to this, where someone stood up and said, "It is our church. It is not someone else's church." And those who decide to make it our problem, we're going to own it, and we're going to put the right face on our church. So thank you for your comments.
Yes.
This is going to be our last question for this section. So please.
I'll try to make it good. Hey, so you mentioned your office gets audited annually. Who performs those audits?
It is called Stonebridge Partners. This is the second company we've had that the USCCB put out feelers or whatever and interviewed a bunch of people. And they are a quality assurance company. They do all kinds of audits for all kinds of companies. And I can't remember how long they've been doing this. I think maybe 8 years now. And they send someone out, 1 or 2 people. They used to come in person every year. Now they do it. They've split the country up, and every 3rd year we get someone in person, and the other 2 years we do it remotely. So it's a pretty intense instrument. We have to answer all kinds of questions that go along with the charter and what we've done. It is, what word to use? They don't use names in the charter, so they just talk numbers. So, and we've passed it every year that we've been audited. That what they'll do if there's issues is they send out like a management letter with something that needs to be managed by the next time you're audited. So both companies that they've used have been very good, and I think they do a good job. So
You had a follow-up?
I did have a second.
Just add to that, we, as the Alaska missionaries, work with a group similar to called Presidium, and we're accredited by them on an every 3-year basis. We have a particular set of criteria that we have to adhere to, both in initial paperwork, keeping up with people, programs, checking up on any accusations that are made on our people, et cetera, every year. And then every 3 years, we're allowed it for accreditation or not. So we're also, even though we're stationed here through the Archdiocese, wherever we are, in at least America, we have to follow a rigid set of guidelines and procedures in order to get accredited on every 3-year basis with them. So we do background checks and pretty much everything
Everything.
in the diocese
Yeah.
we repeat, and we also do the diocese ones when we
Yes.
diocese.
And they put out a report, the USCCB does, the Stonebridge really does it, but it's published by the USCCB, of, you know, they pull it all together. All the reports that have been made, you know, how many people have been background checked and everything, and those are available. So that you can get a number for the whole country, but not by diocese. So, yeah.
Thank you. And you had a follow-up, and then we'll have to wrap up.
So my other follow-up in this would go for Father, who's talking?
They're trying to give them a mic so we can hear them better.
Okay, okay. Well, I wanted to know, in the same way, who performs the psychological testing on the clergy, and then how often is it done in your lifetime or career?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. And I probably doesn't know either.
We do it whenever anybody seeks to come in, at least I'm going by my religious
I know
community.
seminarians.
Anybody who seeks to come into us and become a candidate for the seminary has to go through psychological testing. It's not usually repeated after that, unless there's a situation that comes up in which a provincial decides decides not just with, but sometimes for the individual, that a particular situation calls for counseling or psychotherapy, and that's up to provincials to be aware and observant and proactive enough to be able to see that something like that has to happen, and it does happen. But there's no mandatory requirement that every 3 years or 5 years or whatever that something be done.
Okay, yeah.
Sue, thank you so much for all of your information and honest answers
Sure.
for what you have and what you don't have, and we thank you so much for spending time with us
Thanks
this
for having
evening.
me.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the parish's response. So we're going to start with Mickey Boyle, who has been a lifetime parishioner here more than 40 years. I understand her envelope number is 27. And she is the retired director of pastoral care. She's been an ongoing volunteer, and she is the, I'm not going to say it right, Virtus trainer. So she's going to take us through an overview, and then specifically what is this thing called Virtus. Thank you.
Thank you. The Archdiocese has requirements, and so how does St. Anne's look at those requirements and fulfill them? The Archdiocese directs and oversees all diocesan facilities. The requirements are for background checks and safe environment training. And we do that here at St. Anne's. The Archdiocese requirement meets or exceeds all of the articles in the Dallas Charter. St. Anne's, as a diocesan parish, subscribes to all requirements of the Archdiocese. We do background checks for clergy, employees, and all volunteers. They must have a background check commensurate with the work they are doing. all have national, state, and county criminal background checks done. Those who will be in a position requiring the use of an automobile will also have a DMV check. Those involved with finance will have a credit check. All background checks must be completed before being engaged in employment or as doing volunteer work. Background checks normally take 1 to 2 days. And if someone does not want to give their Social Security number, Linda Field will work with that individual, not wanting to make their Social Security number public, and they will help them meet the requirement needed. She'll do it, she does it in her office, and the number is done, no one can get into it. Background checks are required to be renewed every 5 years. Now we're going to move on to safe environment training. All clergy, staff, and volunteers must complete training, and I've got to put my glasses on, sorry, prior to working with youth or vulnerable adults. There is a 60-day waiver of completion for those who will not be working with youth or vulnerable adults, which means before they can work with youth or vulnerable adults, they must be screened. Those volunteers who completed the Archdiocesan You Matter program are grandfathered in until that renewal comes due. So those of you who did You Matter and it is still in force because the renewal is every 5 years, when that 5 years is over, you will need to take the Virtus training. Virtus must be renewed every 5 years. The first class is 3 hours, and after that, it can be renewed online. Persons who work directly with youth or vulnerable adults will receive monthly updates from Virtus Online, and we'll talk about that later. Mandatory reporting law. Georgia mandatory reporting law includes clergy, staff, and volunteers. What must be reported? Reasonable cause that one of the following has occurred: physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, sexual exploitation, or endangering a child. When to report? Georgia law requires that no later than 24 hours from the time there is reasonable cause to suspect abuse has occurred. The standard is lower than the old reasonable clause standard. You must report if you suspect something. Where to report? The statute requires a report to the Division of Family and Children's Services, we call it DFACS. The statute allows for a report to a supervisor who cannot change anything in the report. The Archdiocese requires report to the pastor in time to comply with the state statute. Where to report? The Archdiocese requires a report to the district attorney if sexual abuse by clergy, staff, or volunteer is suspected. Why report? Because knowingly and willfully failing to report a suspected abuse is a misdemeanor and will be prosecuted. Failure to report in the Archdiocese is cause for dismissal. We've been talking a lot, and you've heard the word Virtus. I do the Virtus training here at church, and it's one of the steps that we have taken as a parish and as a diocese to help protect God's children. Virtus is a program that was, the importance of it, okay, I'm off my thing here. It's to educate and empower organizations to work together to ensure optimal, safe environments. The mission of Virtus is to educate and empower organizations to work together to make sure that the environment is safe. The word is a Latin word meaning excellence, valor, moral strength, and worth. In ancient times, it denoted a manner and a way of life that aspire to the highest and most positive attributes of people and aspects of interaction. All programs espouse best practices as a standard for excellence in education, training, and crisis management. The focus is on the prevention of wrongdoing. Emphasis and concentration is on the prevention of child abuse and child sexual abuse. In the 1990s, the program was started to be developed, and it is managed by National Catholic Services, LLC. It was developed by the National Risk Retention Center Group in 1997. A group of experts were brought together, and the task was to answer the question, can adults learn how to prevent child abuse? The answer was that child abuse could be lessened if the community took steps to learn about prevention and ways of stopping it, and to have that directed to adults. Critical questions were considered. What tools do adults need to prevent child abuse? How do we raise awareness, shift attitudes, and begin to dispel preconceived notions among employees, volunteers, and parents? How do we train clergy, employees, and volunteers to interact with children? How do we create a program that includes both the prevention of child sexual abuse and Catholic doctrine? And how do you monitor and manage the distribution of awareness training and measure the effect on behavior and evaluate long-term results? The training focus for Virtus is different from programs that have existed in previous years. Most of the programs in previous years were reactive. What happens if? So they wanted to talk about victim advocacy and reporting mechanisms, investigation training, comprehensive response to policies and procedures. Although those things are important, they did not meet the criteria that was needed. So what was developed was a proactive program. Look at policies and procedures. Provide education for clergy, for volunteers, for employees, and for parents. Raise awareness within the community to understand child sexual abuse, to understand who the abusers are, to understand how does it affect the victims. And so Virtus awareness sessions are meant to do that, to educate, to raise awareness, and also to train people within the community how to handle the situation. What are the things they need to look for? And so Virtus, so that people understand it, is an excellent program. Those of us who are facilitators spent several days learning the program, learning how to implement the program, learning how to facilitate the sessions. The purpose of the sessions is to have a frank and honest conversation about child abuse, sexual child abuse. Show it for what it is. Understand the victims, the survivors, understand the perpetrators, to be aware. We cannot make an environment safe if we do not understand the problem and if we don't know how to confront it or what to do. So that's basically what Virtus does. It's a 3-hour session. You come in, we spend time looking at a video, well prepared, well done, follow it up with group discussion. And that video is emotional. It talks about child sexual abuse It shows victims, how it affected them, how it affected families. And it really gets you. I mean, it really, really makes you open your heart and mind to understanding the problem. Then there's a second video which talks about what are the things that we need to do as a community to prevent this from happening again, to prevent it from happening in our community, in our parish, among our children and grandchildren. I highly recommend, if you have not taken Virtus training, even if you are not volunteering with children or vulnerable adults, come and sit down and take the program so that you can be aware of what we are trying to present, what we are trying to do, how we are trying to make this environment safe. We are all responsible for making the children of this parish safe, the children of our community safe. And if we have the tools, if we have the knowledge, then it will help us keep our children safe. It's not an easy subject. It's a very difficult subject. We all come to it with our own backgrounds, with our own prejudices. We wish some history were different than it is, but we are the ones who have to be responsible to make sure that this environment is safe. If you are interested in the Virtus session, there are handouts outside that talk more about Virtus. If you would like to come to a session, we have the sessions right here at church. There's a way to register for the sessions. The other good thing is, as a facilitator, the Virtus program is wonderful because we get monthly updates. We are constantly training. We have all kinds of resources that are available to us. But I think it's a wonderful program, and I hope you all take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. Thank you for your dedication to our children and giving us all something that we can do practically. Jenny Keel will come up next. She'll talk to us about how the catechists are learning to implement these protocols across the entire Parish School of Religion, and members of her team are here with her to support her, answer any questions. But we can let Jenny take it.
So I'm Jenny. I'm the director of Launch Children's Ministry, and behind me I have Nancy, the director of preschool, and we've got Kelly Simpson, who's the director of youth ministry back there. So if you have any questions for us, we're kind of all different ranges all over here. So Mickey just talked to us a little bit about how we can help adults get trained and be aware of safe environment and the Virtus training. And I wanted to make sure that we talk about what we're doing for kids. So kind of to answer one of the questions that was available earlier, we were asking what can we do to make sure that kids are safe and how they can speak up for themselves and how they can use their voice. We do have a children's training for Virtus, and we offer it once a year through all of our programs that are here. We tell parents about at orientation. We make sure that they either opt in or opt out for the program, so they don't have to attend if they don't want to, but they do have to sign paperwork saying, I have declined. Otherwise, everybody needs to attend if they possibly can. And during that training, it's really neat. This year, we had a ton. We had 58 people who signed up for it, actually, which was amazing because we only have like 2. And I was overwhelmed by how many people signed up. It was a great conversation, and it was really upsetting that, we've had the scandal and different things that have gone on, but I'm happy that it rose awareness for parents to get their kids there, because if we're only having 2 people come a year and get this training for their children, then they're not going to have the assertive language that they need. They're not going to know what they need to look out for themselves. And the training goes over, we have some videos that the kids watch, and then we have parent and child discussion that they talk about together. They talk about the correct names for their body parts, how to use what I call like your big voice or your assertive voice if you don't like something. And so they talk about those kind of conversations. They talk about different body language, what are boundaries, what are good situations, what are bad situations, what are safe adults, what are unsafe adults, who are the people in my circle that I can talk to if I need to. What if the person that I need to talk to was the person that I thought was safe in my circle? Who can I talk to outside of that? So we raise all kinds of questions and awareness for these children so that they can have a voice of their own, that they can be strong, that they can know where to turn. And we educate them about this, and we have open conversation for the parents. And if you wanted to attend one of those and you didn't get the opportunity, the Archdiocese of Atlanta, if you go on there and find their Office of Safe Environment, they do have a parent at home training course that you could do, kind of like a homeschool version of it. So if you missed our training this year, which we do offer once a year, and the other girls, they offer them at different times too. And so if you missed those, no worries, like if you were sick or out of town or anything, or if you just wanted to look up what we have, if you go to the archatl.org, and if you look under the Office of Safe Environment, they do have a home course that you guys can do. So we wanted to talk about what are some safety tips outside of the volunteers that we've got here and outside of the children's virtues training. So just making sure that you guys are aware and that if you see any kids doing any of these things, you can help out. So we want to make sure that when you are dropping off kiddos, so your children or your grandkids or neighbors or anybody else, we want to make sure that they're being dropped off in a designated area. So that way, in a designated area very specifically, so if they're going to basketball, or if they're going to launch, or if they're going to Edge, or if they're going to preschool, or Life Teen or anything, we want to make sure that they're going to the correct locations, because in those designated areas, we do have a certified adult there. At launch, we wear these little lanyards here. In order to get a special lanyard, you have to be certified and background checked. And so we don't just give them out to anybody. And so when you see these, you know that the person who's accepting your child is a person who is trained, a person who is safe, a person who knows what to do with your child. If you just see a random adult there and you're like, here, go ahead, Johnny, take off. We don't know who that person is possibly. So we're just, making sure that adults, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, or whatever, if you're dropping kiddos off for if you're doing an event or something, make sure that they're doing it in the correct and safe area, because if children wander off because there's not somebody there to help them, then there's nothing we can do. We can only accept them in the areas that we've designated. And for each of our departments, they usually have like carpool maps, or we'll talk about it at orientations, or we'll give parents that information to say, hey, in these 2 drop-off areas, this is where we will be. If we're not there, then we can't guarantee your child's safety. If you drop them off in the church and we're downstairs on launch and you just hope they find their way there, we can't guarantee everything for you. So we're asking for those kind of things, designated areas, and making sure that they're with a certified adult that is identified. So in each of our departments, we have different ways for identification, and the girls can talk about how they do that. Any of the badges that we have here say if they're a staff member, and usually like Launch and Edge volunteers, they'll have a different kind of lanyard of their own, and I know all the preschool employees also have a special badge there so that you know who you're looking for. And if any of the kids are dropped off late, a lot of our doors have automatic locks on them. So we're making sure that if anybody does drop off a child to a specific event, that you're making sure that if you did arrive late, you walk that child in. Because especially at launch, our doors auto-lock in order to ensure their safety there. And we want to make sure that they are safe. And so if it's like 15 after and you just let the kid get out of the car and go for it, they may hit a door or a wall that they can't go through, and then they might go outside and walk around the building and try to find a different way in, and again, we can't ensure their safety. So we want to make sure that people are getting them to the correct areas. And then we had a tip that in Mass, we usually have a staff employee in the narthex that's kind of in the welcome area, but we do not have staff employees regularly around the restrooms in both of the areas here. And so if you want to 100% ensure a child's safety, The only way to do it is to be escort them to the restroom, because we do have staff members in different locations during Mass and during events there, but we don't just usually hang out in the bathroom. That's not like the most exciting place for us to hang out. So if you do want to have your kid have 100% safety in all areas that they're going to, the only way that you can do that is by escorting them yourselves. And so what are some of the other volunteer policies that we have here? The ladies here talked about the U+2 rule, and just want to go over that a little bit more to make sure that you guys understand what that is, especially with our departments. So for example, if I have a volunteer that is helping out in a classroom, and so they're waiting in that classroom and only one child arrives there, we're not allowing that volunteer and that child to be in the classroom alone together, because it doesn't follow what's called the U+2 rule. And so we have asked our volunteers to please stand outside of that classroom and in the hallway so they're in public view of people. And so the child could be in the classroom doing coloring. They can easily and visibly see the child, but people can also visibly see them. So nobody should be in a classroom with doors closed and windows covered or anything. That's not how things should be done. They should always be visible. Now, once another child comes into that room, now we have a U+2 there, so we have a witness in there. Now the adult can walk in and help out. We always have, for all of our classrooms, we always have 2 adults for every child that's in there. So we always try to follow that rule there. And if we sent out an email to parents recently just reminding them that, hey, we need substitutes, because if we get one person and somebody else is sick, we're going to cancel the class that's there. So we're asking for a lot of subs, but if you remember from all the things that we heard here today, being a substitute is not exactly an easy task anymore. And we're making sure that that's important, that all of our subs follow the background checks, they get the training that they're needing there. So we're asking people to do that well in advance if you're going to be helping out there. And all of our volunteers are asked to be mandatory reporters, and we discussed what that was about. So the next thing that we're going to discuss is with Miss Linda Walsh here, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
So for those of you who don't know Linda, she is the Director of Pastoral Care and happens to be the parish nurse, and she's going to talk about vulnerable adults.
And I'm not the most savvy person on technology either, but I found the button. So protecting vulnerable adults. We've been talking about child safety, but in the church and in the world, we have adults that are also considered vulnerable. And we did mention that anyone over 18 is considered an adult, anyone under 18 is considered a child. But it is important that we understand that we do have people in our community here at St. Anne's and out in the world that may be over that age and still need some type of assistance. So anyone who would be considered a vulnerable adult would be anyone who is an adult with either a disability or a special needs, or in many cases with pastoral care, any adult needing some type of assistance. It could be of the mind, body, or spirit. So someone comes in and wants to talk to a priest, someone who has a health issue, someone who is in desperate need of assistance in any way, even at our food pantry. Anyone who's in need would be considered a vulnerable adult. And just a couple of examples with our ministries here at St. Anne's, we do have people who go to the Eucharist, to take Eucharist to the sick and homebound. They're in facilities as well as maybe at their home. We do take meals to the homebound. We do have home and facility visitation. We have support groups, so the facilitators of support groups are also cleared. Interaction with anyone who's homeless or in need of assistance, even spiritual direction meetings, and our health and wellness program. So anyone who's involved as a volunteer in any of those programs here at St. Anne's do qualify for the need to have the background check, and they are checked. So again, I just want to assure you that anyone who is an adult who's in need, those who are in contact with them are also following the procedures within the Archdiocese and St. Anne's procedures for background checks.
Thank you so much, Linda. So I think you have seen the strength of the group here on the ground that are making sure that our community is being afforded all of the resources that we can make available to them. But I'm sure that there are some very specific questions that some of you might have of this group.
would like to know what our church, St. Anne's, is doing to ensure that there aren't any loopholes in this training. For example, I'm very happy with a renewed strictness, if you will, for lack of a better word, that I've witnessed in multiple groups at our parish this year, Launch being one of them. I'm thrilled. That makes me very happy. But it just last year, it wasn't quite that strict. For example, I taught Launch with a teen last year. I'm teaching Launch with a teen this year. There is a difference in who can sub in my classroom this year versus who could sub in my classroom last year, and that makes me happy. And also there was an issue that we discovered with Scouts, because volunteers go through independent background checks by those separate organizations, and somehow either there was a miscommunication or something, and not all Scout volunteers were doing the additional Archdiocese background check, and now all of that has been repaired to my knowledge too. So I just want to make sure that we have developed something at our parish to ensure that this is adequately communicated so that these things don't happen again. Not that I'm aware that anything bad happened, but we just need to put something in place, like an internal audit, if you will, to ensure that all volunteers are actually going through all of this too.
Thanks, Mickey. Looks like you're going to take that.
Well, what I can say is we are in a process of doing that, requiring, as we get our feet on the ground, as we promote this program, as we try to make the environment as safe as we can. You're right, the Scout leaders they have Scout training. We had a session, an awareness session, a Veritas awareness session, and the Scout leaders attended it. As far as teens go, we do not do Veritas training with teens. So the teens are coming through Life Teen, through their program. We do not background screen, nor do we train teens in Veritas. That's for adults. They are background screened, okay.
We do train core.
We train core.
Those who work with the core, and the staff specifically are trained for that.
But what we're trying to do is as we get more people trained, we are expanding the ministries and the number of people that we train. We did a Veritas session a couple of weeks ago. We have another one coming up the 13th of October. We have another one scheduled for the 27th of October. As needed, we keep adding additional training sessions. So the goal is, you're right, we would like to have as many people in the parish trained as we can possibly have trained. Okay, so we are working. What I can say is, in all honesty, I understand your concerns, and you can see changes that have been taking place over the last year or so, and we're trying to move forward to get as many people trained and background screened as we can. Does that answer your question?
Mickey, before we move on, we have a comment about the Scout training.
Hi, I'm the Scout leader here for, girls, but I mean, the Scouts have their own background checks that we undergo, as well as our own youth protection. But as soon as everything was brought to either the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, I mean, we have no problems with being compliant and taking double training and double background checks.
But my question went a little further than that, or at least I tried to. I want an internal audit system in place so that new Scout leaders, because every year, hopefully, Tom and Debbie have new volunteers that come in, and then I've got subs coming in when I can't be there who now have to have that training. And in the past, my subs did not necessarily have that training. So I just want to make sure we're doing really good things here. I think it's all very positive. I just want to point out this concern that we need to take it a step further and make sure we're checking that somebody hasn't fallen through the cracks by accident.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I agree with you, absolutely. And we, internally, we actually are doing audits this year, and thank you. I mean, I 100% agree with you that in the past, we have been doing our very best, but for subs especially, we kind of had a, emergency basis to where, we didn't have this huge pool of people that had all of their credentials. And so we were kind of following at pastor discretion. If one person in the room had all of their credentials, then they could not leave the other person who may have had some of their credentials, in that room. So they were kind of watching over them for an emergency situation. So if we couldn't get anybody else to help out in that room, we didn't want to just cancel a class. We were getting somebody and kind of having someone else watch over them and make sure they weren't left alone with the kids. This year, that is completely shut down. It's anybody who steps foot in a classroom in any way whatsoever we're making sure that they have every single box checked. And then internally, Linda Field, our HR director, is doing audits currently, and she's doing them pretty regularly, especially right now because we've got so many people coming through that she's making sure, like, hey, this person has like a week before, they need to get their Virtu stuff done, or this person cannot start today because I haven't received, this signature on this paperwork. And she has caught a couple people that we've had to get a sub for or something in order to make sure that somebody does not enter the classroom that is incorrect. So she's been doing a really good job on it, and she's been really busy. So praise God. But thank you. That was a great question.
Please.
Hi. So I appreciate the work that's going on to help vet volunteers, but for my part, I didn't hear much about what the clergy is doing different, right? I mean, the report was around not the volunteers being the issue, right? I think that's why a lot of us are here. So, I mean, when you look at things like 2 kids or 2 adults, 1 child, how confessional and interactions with altar servers. Is the clergy expecting to do things differently, or does all of that sort of get rolled into the other work that's being done?
You might be able to answer
Let
that.
Father answer. I think Father should answer that, please.
Well, yeah. It's a difficult question to answer because the confessional is meant to be, in some sense, a private place between the penitent and the priest. We have in our 2 confessionals windows in the door. The confessionals in there have the penitent seated in a place where you can look in the window and see the penitent, or on the other side, kneeling. I mean, that's what is expected, at least of the diocese, that there be a window in the door of the confessional and that the penitent always be able to be seen from the outside of the confessional. That's answering the confessional one. I don't know how else to answer it that way. We follow the ruling of the diocese, unless, and I'm going to be looking at the possibility of enlarging that window in the door. I don't know how else to do it in order to preserve a certain amount of privacy between the penitent and the priest. In relation to where the servers are, they're over there. The door, we never go in there. And usually no clergy goes in there. The door is usually and is meant to be kept open when the servers go in there in order to vest. They can even come out and vest outside, but normally that door is meant to be open. It shouldn't be closed. But as you see, there's a window in that door. It's on the left-hand side here, also meant to be visible, so that there's always a visibility from the outside to the inside. That again follows a diocesan regulation.
Thank you, Father. That was
Does that
very
answer
helpful.
as much as possible?
Father, we have another question back here.
And I will agree that the reason we're here is because we're all concerned about the recent updates about the tragedies in our church. But it begs the question about what we as adults are doing to make certain that kids do not mistreat one another. And that we don't create an environment where it is okay to mistreat, to bully, to intimidate, to chastise, to groom, whatever term we wish to apply. So I guess my question is, and while we're all responsible adults, some of us are more responsible than others because of the training. What have we done, or what are we doing, to address those issues where we see kids being not just teasing, but inappropriate with one another, in the manner in which they address one another, treat each other, ostracize, isolate, all of those things that kids do. And boys will be boys and kids will be kids is no longer a satisfactory answer to what we see happening in terms of what's okay behavior and what is not okay behavior.
So Jenny or Nancy or Kelly, do you have an answer that you can share? Thought it might be you, Kelly.
You're right. Boys will be boys, but I think that's not a valid answer anymore. I think that they need to learn to be men. And I think that's what we offer as a church, not just men, but Catholic men. And so we do raise a standard in everything that they do. In youth ministry, and I know that in preschool and both launch, they also address bullying. We have specific issue nights throughout the year. We address it in just common conversations with the kids in our normal programming. It comes up within just daily discussion with them, in programming discussion with them, because it's something they deal with. And we try to take and teach them here that with the basis of the love of Christ, they love each other. And our goal is that it actually ends up into the schools. And we, unfortunately, I wish I could be in the school hallways with them. I wish that we could all walk and journey with them, but we're not. And we see some of that detriment and that fallout from the schools and have it come and play into the life here in the church, because this is their life here as well. So when specific things happen like that, we address it. We discipline if necessary, though that's not necessarily what we are ideally wanting to do. But if deemed necessary, it has to happen, because we want them to know that this is their home, that they are loved here, but also we're going to hold them accountable. And we know that we want to raise the bar for them and for them to meet that standard.
Thanks, Kelly. We have another question. And I'd like to remind you, if you haven't had a question asked and answered, please make sure you write it and Stephanie will collect them.
I know most of you on the panel, and you all are wonderful people. And I think anything that the Archdiocese decide to do, the procedures and standards, and you guys will carry out no problem. And I think with you all most women, and with your mother nature, I know you will take very good care of all the children. So I have no worry about entrusting children into your hands. What I am worried about is the hierarchy, the structure of the church, the abusers. How do we prevent them? We can do all we can on the lower level, but it's the high level that's what I have a problem with. The bishops, reported to Pope, and nothing happens. And the cardinals, how could they have become so spiritually depraved and do such a thing to their people, under their authority? That's what I'm worried about. I think we probably should have some kind of procedure so the priests will take care of priests, take care of cardinals, and take care of bishops to review those things, to put a stop to it, so we in the lower level doesn't have to running around try to protect our kids.
So when Father asked us to do this here tonight, specifically what he wanted us to do is to be really well armed with what we can do here in our home. Clearly understanding that the responsibility for the systemic issue, for the hierarchy, rests somewhere else. None of us in this room, none of the humans in this room, have the ability to impact those who are not here. And I think I think we all speak the same. It was very clear, the strength and the love and the commitment that exists in this room to keep our community safe. So thank you for your words. Thank you for your observations. But I'd like to...
Except that I would also say that in the beginning, I remember in the first couple of weeks, what I made sure to do was to let people know that there is some things that can be done. I mean, certainly you have a right and a responsibility to let your voice be known. I remember putting in the addresses of the Archbishop, the Apostolic Delegate, the USCCB Conference, and the Pope. And I have gotten letters from people who have written to those groups with a copy to be, so that and expressing their deep concerns, expressing, as one person mentioned tonight, opportunities for them to start thinking about different kinds of things that can be done, especially to include lay people in things like review boards and formation work and acceptance of candidates, and people are doing that. I'm not saying, I think it's very important to note that the bishops are not unaware that they've got to do something. They're not unaware. It's just a question of how to create the. This is a culture thing, and the culture has taken 500, 600, 700 years to form. It's called clericalism. And it's taken a good long time to form. It's not going to be swept away overnight, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be doing so. I have a firm belief. I also have a hope, but I also have a firm belief that this is the beginning of a watershed moment in which they're not going to be able to bury anymore the ecclesiastical head in the sand and do nothing. I do believe that they're going to take it seriously. It may take time, and again, I think one thing that was said tonight, we are an instantaneous generation. We believe that because you can push a button and it gets done quickly on the computer or whatever, that things, they don't happen that fast. But it doesn't mean that they're not laying groundwork, and it doesn't mean that it isn't going to happen. I do believe, I have a hope that it's going to happen, and I do believe that you do have the right and responsibility to make your decisions and your concerns and what you would like to have and see have done known to them. And if you don't do it, they're not going to know. So please do it.
I love the church, I love the Catholic faith, and I love our priests. I have no problem with St. here. And I have people telling me, oh, why do you say in the church you have all those things? I say, you show me one bad priest, I'll show you. You show me one bad priest, I'll show you 1,000 good priests. So I have a lot of faith in our Catholic Church. But I just, in the hierarchy structure, when we have this kind of problem, we need to dress it up there rather than.
That's right, and that's why I said, I'm putting that. I'll put them out again if you all want them.
Go ahead.
The addresses, because I think it's like anything to do with the same way with, and I hate to use the word politics. It's like the same way we do. If you want your senator to do something, you got to let him know it. If you want the president to do something, you got to let him know it. But we can't just simply sit and say they got to know it without being part of the solution.
Thank you,
and
Father.
that, I think, is what I'm at.
Encouraging, I would think. Not just asking, encouraging us to do. Thank you. All right, so let's spend the last few moments together having a conversation again on how are we caring for those. I'm just going to it right now. That's where I'm going. So what we are going to do is we're going to ask Elisa Covarrubias to spend some time talking to us about what Life Safe does in caring for victims.
No, that's okay. Hi, as she mentioned, my name is Elisa Covarrubias, and I am with Live Safe Resources. We are located in Marietta. We are a nonprofit that serves anyone who has experienced sexual violence of some sort, domestic violence, and elder abuse. I want to start by, first of all, commending all of you for being here, for having this conversation, and to see so many concerned people show up and speak out about this. I think that is progress in and of itself. You mentioned something about culture and how that changes over time, and I want to point out that while your faith may have been in the news recently, there's a lot of this going on in our society and our culture right now, right? These things don't change overnight. It does take a large shift in culture, societal change, to be able to address issues like sexual violence. Not to get into politics, or I'm not going to give my opinion on any of what's going on with Kavanaugh, but the question has come up again and again, why would somebody wait so many years before coming forward? And I like to look at that particular case and think, at the time when she was allegedly assaulted, she would have been 15 years old, and this would have been around 1982 is what I think they said. At that time, the first rape crisis centers had barely been in existence for more than a couple of years, because those started coming up in the 70s. There was no talk about this. There was no education. The laws were different. So we have made progress as a society, and I think you're going to see that reflected in what happens in your church as well. So I'm hopeful that this means things will continue to progress in a manner so that victims will feel comfortable in coming forward, but that also these cases don't happen as often in the future. As I was saying, we are providers of services for people who have experienced these things. Our services are always free of charge, so there is no cost for anything that we provide. We have a 24-hour crisis line, and that is a main point of access for people who are in a crisis situation and need help. So if someone is looking for emergency shelter because they are not safe at home due to a domestic violence situation or sexual assault, that is the number to contact us to see if we have a bed space for a family. It can be a mother and her kids, but it can also be a man who's looking for safety, because we know men can be victims in those cases as well. In terms of sexual assault crisis response, we are the only we are the regional provider for medical forensic exams. So what you hear in the news referred to as a rape kit, we do those free of charge, 24/7. We have trained sexual assault nurse examiners that will respond to these cases, as well as trained advocates that are there just for the victim and their non-offending support persons. We have our own facility to do those exams, but we also go to Wellstar Kennestone Hospital, Cobb General Hospital, and some of our nurses are credentialed to go into Paulding Wellstar Hospital as well. All the law enforcement agencies in Cobb, Paulding, Cherokee, and in some of the surrounding areas get our on-call information, so they all know how to access us, and we do those exams up to 5 days out from the assault, okay? So I just want you to know that's available. There aren't a ton of centers that do these exams. In the area, you have Grady Rape Crisis, Gwinnett Sexual Assault Center, DeKalb has a program, Douglas County, and then you're getting further out into Rome. So we are the primary provider for Cobb, Paulding, and Cherokee areas. Our counseling programs include individual and group counseling, and we provide that in English and Spanish, again, free of charge. And it doesn't matter how long ago the victimization was. So even if it happened to someone 20 years ago, they were not ready to talk about it at the time, they want to come get counseling now, they are welcome to do that. And we also offer counseling to secondary victims. A secondary victim is somebody who is also being impacted by that trauma. So if you, for instance, have a child that was assaulted, that's stressful for you as a parent. If you have a spouse or partner, a sister, a brother, somebody that was affected by one of these things, it can be difficult for you because you want to protect that person, you weren't able to, and there might be other things going on that affects the family dynamic. So we offer free counseling for those persons as well. It is important to get counseling when you've gone through something like that, or at least look for other sources of healing. If it goes unaddressed, people tend to cope in a very unhealthy ways sometimes. That can mean substance abuse, or maybe they're holding on to anger, having flashbacks. And we tend to hold stress and trauma in our body as well. So to give you an example, if you've ever been really nervous about something coming up, you feel it in your stomach, right? You can feel so uncomfortable. And these kinds of things can leave a lasting impact, so we do want to encourage people to get help if they can. Right now, we have some very exciting support groups specifically for people who have experienced sexual violence that are different from like a talk therapy group. So some of them include yoga, drumming, and a variety of other things, again, free of charge and for different age groups as well. We help people obtain temporary protective orders. We have a program for victims who are undocumented and are afraid to report to law enforcement because of that. We'll help them with certain types of immigration relief if they qualify in those cases. We also have some advocates at the police department, and we have a special program for victims who are age 50 years and up, because sometimes they have different needs, as well as adults with disabilities. So we work with Adult Protective Services to serve those clients, and can also help with medication, transportation, getting them connected to other resources that they might need for those things. Trying to think if I'm remembering everything else, but I think that's the majority of it. We have a housing program that's longer term, but there is a process for that. So usually the point of entry, if somebody is needing to flee for their safety, is going to be to contact our crisis line and come into shelter. So I'll be here for a little bit. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, and my business cards are out on the resource table as well.
Thanks, Elisa. Anybody have questions for Elisa about the resources?
Thank you, Father, for chairing this. And as we've heard from several people, they leave here and they'll say probably nothing's ever going to be done. And it's mainly because the hierarchy. And I think we as a congregation might make a start here to come up with a group of people that can start to think about how we can get this thing moving as far as, and it's always a respect thing as far as priests and whatever. And evil is terrible. It can infect people, and you can never find that out. So somehow we've got to come out with ways of being proactive, not having to wait 6 months. And I know the press has made a huge deal of this thing. When you look at how many millions of Catholics there are in this country and how many perpetrators there are, but the press has it against Catholics and Christians, and we're all very trusting. So it's very easy for somebody to come in and take advantage of us. But as a group, we need to find out how we can weed these people out. And I think it's up to us to do that, as the lady up on the stage mentioned that. So that's my thing, is where do we go from here? And what action can we take to be proactive about this? And then engage the Archbishop and the others. And we'll find out pretty soon the ones that are stonewalling us and ones that don't want things to happen. So I think we've got to be proactive.
Thank you. Before I move on to more general questions, does anyone have specific questions for Elisa on the resources? The question was, what is the crisis line's telephone number?
That is a great question. So our crisis line is 770-427-3390. 770-427-3390 is our 24-hour crisis line number. The state does have a statewide domestic violence hotline, so say you've got a friend or someone in another county, I believe that's 1-800-33-HAVEN, Haven, and they have an option for Spanish. If you wanted to look up a sexual assault center that's in another area, you can Google it online, but there's the Georgia Network 10 Sexual Assault can connect you. For short, it's www.gnesa.org, Gnesa. You can also Google National Sexual Assault Hotline, and RAIN comes up, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, and they're excellent because their hotline will connect you with the local sexual assault center automatically depending on where you are. And they have an online chat. We know a lot of young people don't like to do telephone calls anymore, including myself. They'd rather chat to somebody. So that is an option for people as well if they want to chat confidentially online.
Thank you. Any other questions for Elisa?
Is this a state organization or is it a nonprofit?
We are a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit, and we used to be affiliated with the YWCA, which was the Young Women's Christian Association, and so we've actually been around for something like 100 years, but we changed our name over the last year. There were a lot of questions about our name, including like, do you only serve women? Do people have to be Christian in order to receive services? And the answer is we serve anyone, men, women, folks who are transgender, identify differently, gay, lesbian, children, older people, everyone. We want everyone to know that they're welcome for our services. We are certified by the state. So both our domestic violence and sexual assault programs go through annual certification through the state. We have to meet the state standards to do that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions for Elisa? All right. So if you have been sitting on a question for anyone on the panel and would like to ask it now, just let me know. Yes. I'll be right to you next.
It's my understanding that the Dallas Charter doesn't cover bishops. The bishops developed the Dallas Charter, but they excluded themselves in the coverage. And I think it's important that if we're going to have a charter to cover priests and deacons, that the bishops and cardinals should be included.
Yeah.
Are they subject to the Virtus program also?
As far as I know, yes.
Because excuse me, so
sure.
Because if they're being investigated under the Virtus program, or like as the volunteers have to go through
Background checks. Background checks.
yeah, go through a background check. I think some of this stuff might have come up that happened many years ago that they'd be responsible for.
Yeah. I, like most of you, just assumed that since they were clergy, that they were part of all of it. And I don't know for sure if that's the case. Now, my heart is telling me that it was not by design, that they just maybe found some loopholes. Certain ones may have figured out a way to get around it. I don't know. But that's something that's going to be looked at. That's part of what they're now going to put a focus on. And there have been suggestions that lay people and maybe even people from other religious faiths helping with that as well. So it's not an internal oversight. It's they're going to get help from the outside. So I agree that everybody should be under the same, and I think that was the intention. I just don't know that, like somebody said, we're very trusting, and some people are more worthy of that trust than others. So, yeah. Well, and again, the other thing that I will say about background checks, and I'm all for them. I'm not saying they're not a good thing, but they're only as good as what they can find. And a lot of the stuff that's coming out now, nobody ever knew about. I mean, like the law. That's what background checks are going to find, is if people have been arrested and put in jail and gone to court and that kind of stuff. And I don't think any of that would have been there. So,
just let me to answer Frank's question. Frank, this is the four things that specifically the Administrative Committee of the USCCB is presenting to the full body of bishops in November for their discussion and decision making. Number one is the approval of the establishment of a third-party reporting system that will receive confidentially by phone or online complaints of sexual abuse of minors by a bishop and sexual harassment of a sexual misconduct with adults by a bishop. It will direct those complaints to the appropriate ecclesiastical authority and as required by applicable law to civil authorities. Number two, it's instructed the USCCB Committee on Canonical Affairs and Church Governance to develop proposals for policies addressing restrictions on bishops who were removed or resigned because of allegations of sexual abuse of minors or sexual harassment of or misconduct with adults, including seminarians and priests. Third, it's initiating the process of developing a code of conduct for bishops regarding the sexual abuse of a minor, sexual harassment of or sexual misconduct with an adult, or negligence in an exercise of his office related to such cases. So this is going to their November meeting. It may be addressing the loopholes that we're missing, but it's meant to address them. The same program? Are you talking about the same program? Yeah, if we can find once we get the results of
When
the
there's
bishops.
new information to share.
I'll make it known. I'll make known what the results of the bishops' meeting are when we get the results from the appropriate authority, which means I don't want to just get them from a news agency.
All right, we have just about 5 minutes left together, and I have 2 questions already teed up, so we're going to try to clear those quickly.
Okay, if an accusation is made or if there's suspicion of some kind of abuse, what happens to the accused? Are they, what does the church do to kind of get to the bottom of that?
Okay, our church policy is that, and actually Jim Harold would have been here too. He's the parish administrator, but he's under the weather right now. So I'm going to answer it because we just had our safe environment internal audit with staff just 2 days ago. And so what an accused, be it a clergy or a staff member, a volunteer, they are immediately removed from the situation while it has been reported to not only DFACS, but to the proper authorities. If here it would be the Cobb County Police. And they are removed from their position until it has been investigated and an answer has come up. Is it a true fact that this has happened, or was it a false allegation? If it's a false allegation, they are allowed to return to their job. If it is it has been true, then they are automatically dismissed. Does that make sense?
It does.
Nancy.
And
Okay.
I would say those findings should probably funnel back to the victim services so they can update their statistics and track better.
Yes, but
the
any
other-
staff member is held to the same account.
Good.
Now, if it is a
Good to hear.
clergy, then there are additional responses if it is that the bishop will make if it is found to be a true accusation.
Great, thank you.
Okay?
And I just want to make one quick point on the point that we can't expect change overnight has come up a couple times, and I've got an issue with that because this story first broke in mass media 16 years ago. We're not asking for overnight change, we're asking for change, and that's a long time. So
The time thing is just, I can't do anything about it. Yeah, but all we can do is to say, we keep the pressure on the bishops to do what they're claiming that they're going to do, which is to rebuild the structures so that these things don't happen again. And we, as individual clergy, especially myself as a member of a religious congregation, have doing the responsible thing of making sure that our formation program does what it's supposed to do in the psychological testing, the ensuring that candidates that come in are not red flagged or yellow flagged, that they have had their examinations and their evaluations, and they continue on during the formation program until ordination, and then we continue to do some things during the remainder of our life to ensure the healthy understanding of our responsibility to each other and to the people we minister to. I don't know what to do with the bishops except to say, keep the pressure on by writing them, making sure they understand your concern, that this be done in a speedy manner, or in as speedy a manner as is possible for them to do, and hope and pray that they do it, that's, you know.
Thanks, Father. We have one last question. Father Gabe's alarm went off to tell us it's 9 o'clock, though, didn't it?
Well, then, of course, I yield to Father Gabe's alarm. Actually, I look around the room, and many of us are pre-Vatican II Catholics. And maybe you're not, I am. And I'm paraphrasing, I know, but when the Second Vatican Council was called, there was consternation among the fathers of the Church, wondering if we, as the lay people, were capable of understanding the changes that were needed in our church to make it more open to people of all cultures. I think, to paraphrase St. John the 23rd, open the windows and let the Holy Spirit come in. It seems like we're at a crossroads that needs the trust of the church to be reaffirmed again. And to me, that requires the windows to be opened and let transparency in, so that those of us that care about the future of our church, for whatever future generations, feel that it is worthy of our trust, so that we can depend on its leadership to do what's right for those of us in the body of Christ. So my question, without putting I guess this will put Father Ray on the spot. Father Ray, I have great trust in you. I always have. Do you trust that the church can recover sufficiently from this crisis, whether it was reported 16 years ago, recently updated, or what will come tomorrow? That we have the leadership it takes to bring our church back to the trust it deserves.
Otherwise, I better go find another job. I mean, if I didn't have this trust, I wouldn't be staying. Why would I want to stay in an institution that I don't believe has a future? I believe very strongly that the future lies not with the clergy and not just with the laity, but with us together. And if we're not working together at this and doing our best to try to keep each other sane and in the right direction, and if we're not doing our best to try to keep each other transparent about what we're honestly feeling, I mean, we're in deep trouble. And I do believe in our future. I do believe that it's already happening in the present. It may not be happening as perfectly or ideally as we would like to have, but I'm working in what I have here. We have a community that I think is doing its best to work collaboratively with each other as laity and clergy to create a church that is welcoming, that is pastorally sensitive and caring, and that seeks to do its best to respond to the mission of Christ, which is given to us here in Marietta. And if I didn't believe that, I would leave. Because it doesn't have a future. That's what scares me about people who want to leave the church. I'm not sure if it's right in the beginning, not just a knee-jerk reaction. If you look at our place, and we're doing our best to try, and I keep saying that to our people, be who we are as best as we possibly can, and people who want to be a part of the church and who want to stay in the church that we are, as not a model, but just a living example, at least at this moment, of how good can still take place in the midst of a very difficult and bad situation. And I believe strongly that we have it here. I hope other places have it too. I really do. And I think that's what every place should be working for, as we're also working for the transparency. Part of the transparency is that good shows as much as the not so good.
Plus, church is Christ's bride. He will never let us down. No, he will always uphold. So that's how we have to trust Christ and the Holy Spirit.
Well, let me end our time together with our thanks to Father Ray for, as I said at the beginning, saying that this is important to make sure that we have the information, the what we know and the what we don't know, the what we can and what we cannot control. And then for all of the panelists, for sharing with us the things that each and every one of us can take a part in to make sure that those in our community who need healing, who need caring for, how can we prevent these things from happening by taking our opportunity to learn about virtus, making sure that when we engage with any part of the Parish School of Religion, that our children are safe and are enabled. We can refer people to the resources that are made available to us. So I thank everyone on the panel for doing a great job tonight. And with that, back to you, Father Ray, for your closing remarks.
I reiterate, I want to thank all the panel for the hard work and the effort. I especially want to thank Stephanie Holden, is Stephanie way in the back somewhere, wherever Stephanie is. Stephanie was the one who really did all the lion's share of work in getting everybody together and putting this night together. So I want to thank Stephanie. She's back there putting out all the stuff for your handouts that you can pick up when you leave. I want to thank Pat for a great facilitated evening, and thank you for being a part of this. What's that? I will do that, but I will also lead you in the La Salette way of praying, which is the Our Father and the Hail Mary, which is what Mary at La Salette said that we should all pray. Have a safe journey home, and pick up your handouts before you leave. Everybody, just grab a hand. No.
Our Father, who art in